Thanks, Minister. I welcome that because, as we all saw, first of all, there's always, unfortunately, been an issue of domestic violence, but it was one of the I suppose, the extremely negative highlights of COVID. And, you know, the stories of even women, you know, because it is primarily women. I know men are affected too, but it is generally women, and then obviously children, you know, sneaking out to cars to try and make phone calls. And that's in situations where people maybe felt in a place that they were able to reach out, because for so long, so many women are, I suppose, just in a very, very difficult place and can't reach out. So that's the basis of my question. It was welcome to see that there was an increase in funding, and I know that, you know, the refuge, I suppose, that I would primarily deal with would be Amber Women's Refuge in Kilkenny, that cover both Carlow and Kilkenny, the two counties. So I always feel that they really have a very high workload covering two full counties. I know they welcomed the extra funding, and, you know, there's a fear now that possibly that's going to be withdrawn again. Now, having said that, I know everything changed again yesterday with the new restrictions, so I'm hoping that that money will definitely be ring-fenced. Thanks.
Well, I think we want to look at the COVID funding, and in light of the changed circumstances and the reintroduction of lockdown, I'll be engaging with TUSLA specifically on the COVID element over the next 6 weeks. But I think it's important that, COVID aside, we have got this very significant increase in investment in TUSLA, and in my engagement with Pat Rabbit, who's the chair, and with Bernard Gloucester, the CEO, I specifically outlined that I wanted to see DSGBV services broadly, COVID aside, prioritised in that spending, because I'm aware that they've had some increases, but it's been a fairly slow increase in the number of years. And I think you touched on it there, we've all become, the pandemic has highlighted what we describe in the programme for government as an epidemic of domestic violence that has always been taking place in this society. But I also saw in my own communities rallying around the local refuge in terms of fundraising, and that's something I hope we can build on.
Thank you very much.
Just very briefly, because I think most of the points have been covered, but I suppose just to stress that, you know, some of the most important services that I always say that I think they offer is the counselling services. And, you know, you don't just physically need a safe place, you emotionally and mentally need a safe place. And a lot of times people will end up maybe going back to a relationship that's negative if they don't have that sort of support. And also the play therapy services that are often offered for children. I think play therapy is totally underrated. I mean, it is an absolutely excellent service for all sorts of reasons for children, but particularly in this situation. So I suppose my experience of any refuge is, you know, they're always struggling for funding, and then I suppose the counselling budget is often separate than the TUSLA money. So if there is additional money there, if they can look at providing services like the counselling and the play therapy, because it just gives a far more holistic approach. And I'm not sure if you'd be able to do this, but if there was any possibility of us getting a breakdown of that additional money going to TUSLA, like which services, you know, is some going to school completion, is some going to obviously domestic violence, and that.
Deputy Minister.
I don't expect you to answer that now, obviously.
I think the majority of the COVID money was very much for practical things like PPE, like ICT services, extra computers so people could work at home, and to fulfil if a staff was out sick with COVID or something like that, so they could bring somebody in. As regards the new funding for next year, that will be in the TUSLA plan, and once that's drafted, I'll definitely, I'm sure we'll get questions on it. I just think it's good to see. I think I have about 4 questions today at the top 20 on domestic violence. I think your colleague is asking a question on domestic violence as well, and I think it's really good that we're having this much broader conversation about the issue. And I suppose we're talking, I suppose, in the pressure that the services has been under. It is worth noting that 2 new refuges opened in 2020, one in Galway, one in South Dublin. It's 8 spaces, it's not a huge amount, and I think Deputy Brown and some others are talking about the wider issue of refuges that we will get an opportunity to talk about maybe later on in this session.
Minister, you've been very lucky in the draw, Deputy Funchion. Yours is the next question as well. 25, yeah. Okay,
I thought there was a space in between them. Yeah, I guarantee you might look at running it then. So, Minister, my question is to ask yourself what supports are in place for young people that have been severely hit by COVID-19, particularly in terms of their education, career and employment, and the impact on their mental health. Thanks.
Minister.
Very much, Deputy, and I think we had a good discussion about this issue in the Select Committee there recently, as what young people have been severely affected by the restrictions brought in to protect public health during the pandemic, and this has been borne out by a lot of research, and particularly by a recent piece of research commissioned by my department and undertaken by Spun Out, which was called How's Your Head, and in recognition of the vital work that's played by youth work in the country in providing support to young people, funding levels were maintained throughout the current crisis period. And this enabled youth services to continue to provide services to young people, particularly to marginalised, disadvantaged and vulnerable young people. And early on in my tenure, I was able to provide an additional small grant to support local funded organisations, youth information centres and youth clubs to defray some of their COVID-19 costs. And since then, in this budget, I've secured an additional €5 million investment in youth services for 2021. And I see this funding as supporting these frontline services as they seek to innovate to continue to provide crucial services to vulnerable young people. And this significant increase in funding, I hope it's seen as a recognition of the role that youth services played in the lives of young people, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic. My officials and I, we have a good working relationship with the youth sector, and I'll continue to engage with them as we seek to support young people through this very challenging period. And at a broader level, my department is committed to leading a discussion with all relevant departments and agencies to ensure that mental health services, educational institutions, youth services and sports clubs all work together so each is aware of the challenges young people have been facing and can help ease them back into everyday life and support their resilience. So I suppose we're acting on that funding element and that significant increase of funding in the budget, but also acting on the policy element as well. And indeed, even in the framework for reopening, there is a significant reference to the mental health issues, and that research by Spun Out fed into that the framework.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Funchion.
Thanks, Kieran Corley, and thanks, Minister. Yeah, I welcomed the increase. I'll be very honest, I was critical and do stand over that criticism of the lack of funding for early years, but I do welcome the money that was invested for youth. I suppose it's a sector that maybe got a little bit forgotten about during COVID, and I know the people that are involved in the sector and that work in the sector really did their best to reach out to young people and include them, and I'm particularly conscious of I know there's a huge amount of young people interested in sport and involved in sport, but there's also a huge amount of people that are not. And I always feel that I suppose, you know, the kind of maybe the drama groups and the other groups sometimes get a little bit more to the margins, like, and just the work, for example, of the young Irish filmmakers, so I'm sure you're aware of, but we have an excellent young Irish filmmakers in Kilkenny that do amazing work. My own children are involved in it, and you know, just as I have someone coming into the teenage years, and the difference, I mean, is incredible, and the supports and the emotional supports they need at that age. And I just think the lockdown and the COVID was so difficult on them. It's so important that we ensure now that they're kind of part of the recovery. We hear a lot of talk about economic recovery, but it's really important for our young people that they're not forgotten about.
Minister.
Well, as someone who fit into that category of not being particularly sporty in that age, I'd particularly recognise the importance of that supporting the interests of young people beyond the area of sport. And I suppose we in the department, we have universal schemes and we have targeted schemes, and those targeted schemes are to help young people in particularly disadvantaged areas. But the universal element as well is really important, that a young person from any area in the country should be able to avail of youth work and youth services, because they are, and as the point you were making out, they are so important to developing an individual's confidence, their self-esteem, their ability to actually lead. And in my engagement, I was meeting with a Zoom meeting with Eco UNESCO, so a group of young people kind of focused on environmental issues recently. And I suppose both their capacity to engage with me, their capacity to advocate was incredibly important and incredibly impressive. And I think that their engagement with me kind of really prompted me to ensure this very significant budget allocation, actually more than they asked for in this budget this year.
Thank you. Deputy Funchion.
Just briefly, I think, Minister, you were on the Zoom call or conference that the National Youth Council of Ireland had a few weeks ago. I thought that was excellent. There were two young people in particular that addressed it. And it's just now that we're coming into, you know, lockdown 2 or this phase 5, and I know schools, the plan is to try and keep them open, but I suppose the reality is, like, school is one part, and it's an important part, but there's all the other social activities. Now, anyone that hears me speaking here regularly knows I'm always talking about counselling and mental health and play therapy for kids, but we also do need just the normal fun activities, and that's why it's more important now than ever that there is funding and that there is supports there, because, you know, it's just not good. You just saw so many people of a certain age group you know, just kind of nearly locked away in their rooms, not actually locked away in their rooms, but that sort of, they're at that age, they're not kids, they're not adults, they don't really know where they are, they're trying to figure everything out for themselves, and it is really, really difficult, and any sort of services. And I did notice just really briefly that the Youth Council had said in their presentation that a lot of people ended up not maybe engaging as well after a while with the online. You know, I think you can only do so much online before people really miss that normal kind of human interaction. Thanks, Karen. Sorry.
Look, there's no doubt that the move to level 5 presents challenges everywhere. I think you probably noted yesterday that we've continued to allow training for young teams, and I think that's important. I know that's on the sports side of things, but I think it is important for, again, that issue of mental health that you flagged up. I think during the last lockdown, a lot of the youth services moved online very quickly, and as levels came down, they were able to come together in smaller groups, and unfortunately for, I think, the time being, we'll be back to solely online provision. I think a lot of them have got better at it, and because some of the capital supports we've been able to put in, they might have slightly better technology, and next year hopefully that technology will be significantly enhanced. I know particularly some of the groups were looking at maybe doing dropout visits, socially distanced obviously, but dropping food or even like little care packages for some of the youth groups, like, you know, books or things like that, just something to keep people entertained. But look, really acknowledge the great work, and, you know, we're still engaging with the sector at all times, and if we see methods where we can support their work during the next 6 weeks, we'll absolutely do that.
Thank you very much.